Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining the Giraffe Grackle student orientation for the practicum portion of your course. You all know me, Mary Alice Moore, class coordinator. If you don't know me, then hi, nice to see you. I've been tracking your progress through our program, and we're excited that you're at the practicum level and all that good stuff. Okay, Frank, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Frank. Been at Could a Dream for a year and a half. I run Practicum. I do career stuff for students and apprentices. I also work on the lab side of Could a Dream for projects as well.
Awesome.
Is that okay? Should I say
Yeah,
more? No?
yeah, that's good. If
Okay.
you run into issues, team-wise, and need anything, Frank and I are here for you. So reach out to
Yep.
either of us. If you don't get a hold of me, get a hold of Frank, vice versa.
Hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in, answer all those burning questions, but you can also unmute and interrupt with questions. You can put questions in the chat as always, whenever we're presenting information. So yeah, hopefully we'll answer things, get you feeling comfortable for getting started on Monday, and then you can rock and roll for the next 10 weeks. Okay. First up is practicum structure. You're probably familiar with this if you joined the practicum info session during class about, wow, almost 2 months ago now. React graduates and Node graduates. There's going to be a couple of each of you or a few of each of you in each of the group teams that are in practicum. We have 7 teams in this practicum grouping. React graduates, you're going to be building the front end of your application that you all decide on what you're going to be building. Node students will be building the back end. You do get starter repositories just to make sure that things are kind of up and running and connected to begin with. And then from there, you customize them and build them out. Each group has their own mentor, or in this case, mentors. I think we actually have 2 mentors at least on every group. You might not know who your mentor is yet. That's why it's really important that you all decide by Friday what day and time your team is going to be meeting regularly for your weekly meeting, because then I need to share that information with the mentor teams that we have, so that way we can align mentor availability with your team's availability and get you all synced up. But in general, React students, Node students, mentors oversee. And then Frank and I are here sort of on the outside if there are things that you wind up needing. I think structure is pretty straightforward, but if anybody has questions, feel free to, unmute or drop them in the chat. All right, let's talk a little bit about curriculum. As I mentioned before we started recording, you should be able to log into the Learns app and see the Giraffe Grackle Practicum as one of your courses now. You should be able to see the calendar. It does have a week lesson for this week, which is really just a welcome page that reiterates sort of our structure and our format, answers any questions about the role you play, the role your mentors play, that kind of a thing. So feel free to take from now until Monday to look over that information on the Welcome to Practicum page. And from there, you do 2-week sprints, 4 2-week sprints, and then you have 2 weeks of career prep at the end. We'll talk a little bit more about those in greater detail here in a minute. But your primary goals as you're working through this 10-week curriculum is to build on what you learned in class. So strengthen and feel comfortable using what you used in a different way, because you don't have a to-do list that you're building line by line, or you don't have a node project that you were building line by line with a video and then had to tweak at the end for your final project or anything like that. So it just gives you a chance to kind of customize and take these tools that you got in class and use them to make something creative and your own. So build on that learning, cooperate, collaborate, communicate. And I put communicate in all caps here because that is really like the foundation, the building block of having a successful practicum experience is communicate with one another, communicate with your mentors, be on the same page. And I know you all have busy schedules, busy lives. That's not always possible. That's why asynchronous communication will be your biggest friend. If you work back-to-back shifts, if you're third shift, anything like that, where it's hard to sync up with people that are in your group, still communicate, even if it's just hey guys, I just got off work. Here's, where I'm at with things. This is when I'm going to be working on things. So that way people are aware that you are still part of the group, even if you might be hard to reach, and you are making progress on things that are assigned to you or that you've picked up to help the team out with. You're going to be learning about workflow process. So we'll talk a little bit about Agile, Scrum, and stand-ups here in a minute. But workflow process just of how to work with other developers on the same body of code without stepping on each other's toes and having a too many cooks in the kitchen kind of scenario where it's confusing about who's handling what. Two people do the same thing, but they do it differently, and then you have conflicts and all kinds of fun chaos. So workflow process is going to help you avoid issues like that. Also helping to avoid issues like that are some project management tools. We can set you up with GitHub projects if your team is more comfortable using something like Trello or Jira or whatever kind of Kanban style or other type of process. That's totally fine, and you are welcome to use those tools. GitHub projects is probably going to be the easiest out of the box for you if you're unfamiliar with it, but to each their own. It's okay to use something other than that. You'll be learning how projects are managed from concept, build, testing, deployment through all those sort of phases of how that happens. You're going to see merge conflicts, and you're going to see how those merge conflicts are handled. Inevitably, when you have enough people working on a project, you'll have some discrepancies in code as you're trying to merge people's features and codes into the primary body of code that gets published that the user winds up interacting with. So merge conflict resolution is going to be a very important thing to learn. You'll learn about code review. You might do a little code review. It's not a bad idea to get comfortable with how did this person write their code, understanding how it's written that way, because inevitably when you get hired onto a position, whether that's now or in the future, then you are going to have to look at code somebody else wrote before you and figure it out. So code review is always a good skill to practice. You'll practice demoing your work too when you're interviewing for jobs, as well as when you are working with clients. If you ever wind up being in a position where you're working with a client for a product that your team is building, then it's important for you to be able to get a little experience and get comfortable with how to talk about what you've built and how to demonstrate what you've built. So as a team, you will demonstrate your project at the end in a fun final project presentation style night. And at the end, you will have completed and deployed a very simple app. It's okay to be simple. This is V1 for what you're building. It's okay to not have all of the bells and whistles and all of the amazing future features on there. It's okay to keep it simple. And then, of course, you'll be prepping and starting your job search too, potentially, whether the job winds up being an apprenticeship with us or being in a job with any other tech industry company. Anything to add to that, Frank? Anything I'm leaving out?
So much, Marielle, so much.
I know.
We'll need a couple hours, but no. So everything you said was perfectly 100% correct. So again, like just to summarize all these things, like the reason why you're doing practicum, apart from being a requirement for application for apprenticeship, is basically what you've learned up to this point, whether you took the React class or the Node class or both. You built things on your own, right? The little assignments and projects and so forth. But building something as a group is exponentially different as far as the amount of work, the amount of communication, the amount of just managing tasks in comparison to working something on your own. Working on something on your own, you control everything. Working on a team, you don't. But that's crucial because when you look for jobs, wherever that job may be, the person that's going to be interviewing you will say, okay, what work have you done in the team? Yes, it's good to show I built this, I built that as an individual project, but they want you to see what work have you done as a team, because 99% of the time when you work at a job and get paid as an engineer, as a developer, you'll be working as a team. You have front end, you have back end, you have UX, you have product manager, you have project manager, et cetera, other stakeholders. So working in a team in the practicum will give you some of that real life experience, which is crucial, especially now in this job market. So that's like one of the biggest things. And again, just all the things that Marielle's talked about, developing your skills, understanding how merge conflicts work when you're working on a file that someone else is working on that file before, and making sure there's no changes or conflicts on the lines of code. How to give another coworker or other teammates a review of their code. That's what you'd be doing on the job. How to do presentations. You'd be doing that at some point in your career, maybe not initially, but eventually will be. Understanding how the team process works. So all these things you'll have to do on the job. And that's why we have practicum for everybody here to work on it to get some real life experience.
And you get to do it in a safe space. You don't have
Mm,
clients and stakeholders on the
mm,
project you all are building because you are the clients and stakeholders. So it makes it
mm,
a little less pressure from that standpoint.
mm,
Okay, so similar to class, the time commitment should be about the same. 10 to 20 hours a week is how much time you should be spending on practicum work for the app that you all are building. If you're spending less time than that, or if you're spending more time than that, you need to be talking to your team. Things should be balanced across your team for getting things accomplished. Different from class, less structure. You all are deciding what you're building, and we can't write a curriculum around 40 different ideas of what people may or may not build. So there'll be a sort of skeleton of here are the things that you should be working on, here are the things that you should be focusing on, but it's not going to be, okay, now write this block of code on this file of this project to be able to achieve this feature. So it's a lot less structure. There might be things that your team needs or wants to incorporate in the project that you're building that you will need to research yourselves. So if there's some kind of, I don't know, AI plugin type of thing you want to put on your app, if there's a package of some sort you want to incorporate or some feature that you want to include, then you'll need to dive into those dev docs on whatever that is to be able to incorporate it and work with it properly. You'll have objectives every week. So keeping with that sort of less structure idea, there'll just be objectives as far as things that the team as a whole should be accomplishing, that just your front end or back end should be accomplishing. And of course, you'll have things specifically just for yourself. So you all will divvy out the work as far as, okay, who's going to take on authentication, who's going to take on testing, who's going to take on framework, whatever kind of a thing, wireframing, whatever. So different tasks will go to different people. So each individual will be working on a task or a feature, and you will be working together to kind of divvy that out. You'll have a more regular schedule that hopefully will mimic a real world work situation. Obviously, you all are still in your jobs and lives currently right now. You are not getting hired on by a new company that you can then quit whatever you're doing right now. But it should be at least a little bit more aligned with how it would be when you are in a tech position. So biweekly sprints, weekly meetings within your team and your end, daily asynchronous scrum with your team, where you are updating folks as far as like, this is what I'm working on today. This is a blocker I've run into, or I've gotten this done. I'm starting on such and such tomorrow. So it's just sort of daily asynchronous updates as far as what are you doing? Where are you at with things? Because somebody might be working on something that hinges on you accomplishing your task first before they can then build onto it or connect to it. So keeping in communication is key. And then, of course, you'll be collaborating with each other. You didn't do that in class very much unless you were doing, study buddy type of stuff or getting together with friends within the class to work through assignments. You'll get a lot more collaboration this time around. If you get stuck on a problem, reach out to your teammates, see if they can assist you. If not, then reach out to mentors. So lean on each other, bond with each other. And then career prep. You didn't have any career prep anything in class, and you'll get 2 weeks of it in practicum. Speaking of career prep, Frank, did you want to talk about this a little bit, or would you like me to cover it?
yeah, I could talk about it. So, this is the first cohort of practicum that we're adding 2 more weeks. Normally, if you've taken a practicum before, it was 8 weeks, and then you did a presentation, you're done. Now it's going to be 8 weeks for your building your app. That hasn't changed. The only thing changing on that piece is, as mentioned in this slide, normally we would have the presentation for practicum during that 8th week on that Tuesday. So you typically have 8 1/4 week, so to speak. Now the presentation is going to be at the end of that 7th week. I think it's how it is. So it'll be on that Friday evening. So that's a slight change of that one. But with the career prep for weeks 9 and 10, so after you do your presentation, that's starting that weekend or that Monday, you have 2 weeks of career prep, which will involve some new content in the Learns app for those 2 weeks. A lot of it will be a lot of just like questions that you'll have as discussion points within your team. So you'll still have your weekly meetings with your mentors, but you'll be discussing like career topics, career questions with your mentors and within each other, as well as like some activities to do to get your mindset more into, okay, like what are the next things I want to do. Now, obviously, A lot of students, like after their practicum, if they don't get accepted into the apprenticeship or they don't want to apply to apprenticeship, they sometimes they take another advanced course, or they say, okay, well, now is my chance to start, looking and applying eventually for jobs. So this kind of gets you in that mindset of like what to do next, as far as like your career and like the process, the steps in the process of like looking, preparing, and applying for jobs. So that's like in week 9. In week 10, the content is based on like thinking of some of the artifacts for your career prep, career development, which would be like obviously like your resume and your LinkedIn and so forth. It also talks about like some basic types of interviews, like behavioral and technical. It gets into that for week 10. Also in week 9, for the people who want to apply for apprenticeship, we give all the applicants a coding assessment. So I'm going to add in on week 9 a little example, kind of mini like assessment with some examples of the type of problems you'll get for the actual assessment if you apply for apprenticeship. So those will be for weeks 9 and 10. So also I'll be giving a weekly group presentation for all the Practicum members. So if you can make it, great. If you can't, it'll be recorded. And basically just be kind of like reviewing and covering topics that were covered in the weeks 9 and 10 curriculum. Then like, answering any questions you may have too.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. Before I
Yeah.
move on, that was a lot of information about curriculum. That was a lot of information about the new career prep stuff. Does anybody have any questions that we need to answer before moving on? Cool, cool. And again, you can always pop them in the chat, interrupt anytime, all that good stuff. Okay, so what kind of tools are you going to be using? Obviously, you'll have the classes.codethedream.org Learns app site that you were using for your curriculum for class as well too. So it'll be similar structure and format, no new tools to learn there. Same kind of calendar you work through each week. Weeks have dates. The only difference is you're not going to have a specific like, here's a coding assignment, turn in your coding assignment. You're just going to be working on your project from week to week. So nothing to turn into us. Just work through the sprint information for each week. GitHub, obviously you'll be using GitHub. Code the Dream School will be building out your starter repositories for all of your projects. If any groups have already started doing some code, we've had this happen in the past where there's been a team or two that was really excited about Practicum and they started doing repositories and building their code on their own under somebody's account. That's totally fine. Just talk to Frank or I so we can talk about how to be able to migrate things over if need be to save you all some time since you would have already been working on things. If you are not in that situation, don't worry, that's great. We give you everything kind of out of the box to be able to start with. So you'll have those starter repositories the first couple of weeks. You'll be working with mentors and or working through the curriculum information to clone those down, get things set up and comfortable and make sure things are behaving how they're supposed to. As I had mentioned earlier, you can use GitHub projects or your team can use other tools if you'd rather. So that's totally fine. If you're intending to use GitHub projects, just let Frank or I know and we can be sure that that is set up and linked to your repositories. We can also put in shortcuts in your team Slack channels. So that way, when a merge happens or when a pull request is created, it can post an alert in your team channel. If your team would prefer to have a secondary team channel that's just for those GitHub alerts, that's fine too. Again, just communicate with Frank or I if there's something along those lines that your team is wanting to do for your workflow process. Slack channel for collaboration, communication, discussion. You can use it to meet for meetings too if you want to. We do have this exact Zoom link that you're using right now for this orientation set up as just a recurring meeting so that teams can hop on this link anytime they need to and they don't get kicked off after 40 minutes. So feel free to use this Zoom link to meet if you need to. We do have a calendar that will be shared in each of your team channels as well as on the main Practicum All Slack channels. So you can check and see if there are other teams that will be utilizing the Zoom link at a particular time. It's okay if multiple teams overlap because we'll be giving mentors the host key so that way they can do breakout rooms and each team can go to their own breakout room. The only caveat to that is if you do a breakout room, you can't record. So if your team is recording your meetings for somebody who maybe couldn't make it that night, then you will run into a little bit of an issue there. Optional tools that you might come across, depending on how your team wants to set up their workflow, would be things like Trello, which is comparable to GitHub projects, Google Drive, if you're wanting to kind of keep any, image files or wireframes or anything like that together. Same thing with Dropbox. Figma, if you're using that for wireframing, or Canva. Jira is similar to Trello and GitHub projects as far as processing the bits and pieces of your project that you all work together on, that kind of stuff. So there might be optional things that you all decide collectively as a group to use, and that's totally fine. Just contact Frank or I if there's anything that you need help with as far as setup for those things go. All right, let's talk a little bit about roles and expectations now. So students, you are expected to complete your assigned tasks weekly. Who's assigning you those tasks? Obviously, as a team, you're going to break up the work into little chunks of who's working on what and agree on who's working on what. So that way it's clear what each person's supposed to be doing. Nobody duplicates work, that kind of a thing. Refer to resources as appropriate for your project and tasks. So if you need to do a little research on something that you're building because that's your task for the week, do so. Communicate regularly with your teammates and mentors. So this means if you are sick, let people know you are sick. If something has happened, if there's been some kind of an emergency, let people know. If you need to withdraw from Practicum, let people know. So communicate regularly. Don't just ghost, because that really puts everybody in a bind if all of a sudden one person that everybody was counting on for a piece of their project goes missing. Definitely attend your group weekly meeting or meetings. You should all be meeting at least for an hour once a week as a group to make sure that you're all aligned on what's to be done and clear on what's supposed to be happening. If your team decides to also have a front end meeting and a back end meeting where just the React students and just the Node students are meeting to be able to talk about what's going on your end, then attend those as well too. Be supportive and encouraging to one another. Obviously, group projects are not without their issues, and people come into group projects with baggage because we've all probably had a group project experience in our past that may or may not have scarred us, or that may or may not have, given us the bias of group projects are always amazing, So regardless, be supportive, encouraging, helpful, respectful, all of the things we expect you to be as a student and member of Code the Dream organization, regardless. Treat Practicum kind of as a dress rehearsal for your first developer job or apprenticeship is what we recommend. So approach it as a professional role. If you just disappeared for 3 or 4 days and nobody heard from you and they don't know what you're working on, or if you're even still around and okay, you would probably get fired from that. So definitely have the same degree of respect and communication with your team and your mentors as you would have as though Practicum were a job that you were hired for. To reiterate, you should be spending about 10 to 20 hours a week on Practicum work. If you're spending more or less time, you need to talk to your team so things can be distributed more evenly. Okay, what do mentors do in this, right? So each mentor should be attending your group weekly meetings. If for any reason you have a weekly meeting where it's only students and no mentors, Frank and I need to be aware of that. So let us know if there is mentorship that is lacking for some reason, because there was probably some kind of miscommunication and that needs to be corrected immediately. The mentor should be providing sort of a voice of experience. This might be the first time that you are working on a group project at all. This might be the first time you're kind of creating something that is out of your all's imagination. So they will be able to help guide you as far as what you're listing and what you'd like to build is not doable in 8 weeks. Here are things that you should probably focus on, or pick out the things that you want to prioritize as the most important things to be able to build as a part of your app, and then hit the others if you have time, kind of a thing. So they'll help kind of guide you as far as that goes to let you know if your project is biting off a little more than it can realistically chew within an 8-week period or not. They are available if you wind up running into any kind of issues. Definitely collaborate and work together. If you're running into blockers on your code, reach out to one another, lean on one another. But if you're hitting walls, not finding answers, then that's what your mentors are there for. So yeah. All right. So this is just an example class flow. Obviously, you all likely will be doing a lot of your work in the evenings or weekends because that's what you've had to do for classwork as well. And you probably have day jobs and responsibilities and whatnot. So it's totally fine for your week to not look like this, but you should communicate as a team as far as this is the expectation for our team. So Monday through Friday, regularly check project management device, whether that's GitHub projects, Trello board, anything like that, updated as needed. So once you've completed a task, mark that your task is complete so everybody knows whatever you're working on, kind of a thing. Work on your tasks throughout the week. Communicate with your team regularly about questions, blockers, progress that you've made, that kind of a thing. Have a daily Scrum meeting. This can be asynchronous, so it's as simple as just go to your team meeting channel on Slack and say, this is what I've worked on today. This is what I'm working on tomorrow. If you have any issues, say, this is where I'm running into problems, that kind of a thing. On your meeting day, everybody in your team, mentors and students, should all meet together for at least an hour, work out any problems, make sure everybody's organized and clear on what everybody's supposed to be doing. If you need to pivot, maybe a couple of people, their tasks they were working on for the week took a lot longer than they anticipated and they aren't done with them quite yet. You might have to kind of adjust your plan as you go, and either have two people work on one project to get it, or one task to get it done quicker, or split up the work across more people to get it done quicker, whatever. So you might have to kind of tweak from week to week. And that's what that meeting day is really for, is to make sure everybody's clear on where we're at, what we're going with, and if we need to make any changes. Weekends, it's up to you all to decide as far as if you want to work on weekends or not. So again, just have clear expectations of each other as far as what the team should be expecting from one another. And then throughout the 8 weeks, keep in mind that your learning goals are, your personal goals, work on those, focus on things that you want to stretch your skills on and that kind of a thing, and work to build your team skills throughout the week. Okay, questions from students up to this point at all that I can answer? All right, cool. So as I had mentioned, Code the Dream School is going to be building out those repositories, those starter repositories for you. There will be 2 repositories for each project, a front end and a back end. So front end team, you will clone your front end one, back end team, you will clone your back end one. You'll be getting those, you'll be getting those links this weekend, to be able to get you what you need to get rolling. Mentors are going to be overseeing the repositories, so they'll have administrative access on those repositories, as will Frank or I, in case there's anything that comes up and we need to be able to handle things of that nature. But students should be observing and assisting with any merge conflict resolution and understanding like what that process is for how to handle that when it comes up within those repositories. So that's a great opportunity to have that as an extra meeting, or to have it during your weekly meeting to be like, okay, let's take a look at this. This is how it works, and make sure everybody's kind of clear on that process. Biggest change, especially for Node students, I don't think this applies quite so much to React students since we had you build your repository from scratch this time around for the React course, but clone the repository, do not fork the repository. Forking makes your own copy, and then if you clone the fork, you're only going to see your work in it. You need to clone the original Code the Dream School repository because your work will be pushed up as a working branch to that Code the Dream School repository. So this is different from what you're doing in that you clone directly. You don't fork and then clone. But it will be the same as classwork as far as you do your work on a separate branch. So that way, when you push up your work, it's not going to break your main publication version of your project. So just be aware of that. Reach out to mentors if you feel a little hesitant or unsure, or if you just need help kind of making sure that you're doing things right the first time around or anything like that. Here's a little visual just to kind of help give you an example. So Code the Dream School GitHub account, we've got the front repository, we've got the back repository. Each student will pull from main, branch off on a working branch, and then do your pushback, and then you'll do a pull request. And if the code works out and isn't overwriting somebody else's code, or there isn't some kind of line by line discrepancy on a file, then great. And the administrator will be able to, your mentors will be able to go ahead and merge it right away. If there is some kind of discrepancy or issue, line by line, sections of code got overwritten, anything like that, then that's when you would handle that merge conflict and work together to see, okay, what bits of codes are accurate that we need to keep, Or do we just need to shift things down a few lines because somebody put in some code a little higher up or whatever? You'll work all of that out and get it straightened out as you process merge conflicts. Okay. So I mentioned briefly earlier about Agile, Sprint, and Scrum. If these are new terms for you, then I've got some definitions here on the screen for you to start with. So Agile is just the approach to working through a project. So it's an iterative approach to project management that involves working in small, manageable increments of work. So the example I think that we used to give is, you want to build the best hamburger in the world. So start out with just a plain hamburger. Get just the bun and the burger in a good situation. Have people test it, have people eat it, get feedback on how that is, and then start with your next iteration of it. Okay, it would be better with a little bacon. Let's throw a little bacon on there. It'd be better with some, Gruyere cheese. Throw some cheese on there. So that agile process of an iterative approach of you build the basics and then you start iterating over it to make small improvements until you get it to where you want it to be. So that's sort of the concept as far as agile. Sprint in Practicum is a 2-week period. It isn't always a 2-week period. It kind of depends on what company you're working with, but in general, it's a defined period of time where teams are going to be focused on a specific feature of the product. So, you're getting going on a very first project. Okay, let's just get our skeleton of our project built with, no features, no styling, whatever. Start out small. And then the next sprint would be, okay, let's start making our styles match the whatever, and so on and so forth. So it's focusing on small bits to be able to just be concentrating on the work that needs to get done, and then you iterate over again through that agile process to be able to build on the work from previous. Scrum is just short daily meetings, usually daily meetings, to identify each team member's progress on tasks. So you usually say, here's what I've done, here's what I'm blocked on, if there's anything that you're blocked on, and here's where I'm going next. So it's just checking in with one another to be able to be aware of how the traffic is moving as far as work goes. There were a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to make sure those are addressed. Yes, for those of you that will be working on both front end and back end, I know there are a couple of you that were dual enrolled, graduated out of both of those classes at the same time, and were intending to work in both front and back end. Yes, you would clone both repositories. And then Frank's answer for why is front end and back end separate is in the chat. So feel free to read that for recording's sake. It can be combined, but normally most apps have separate repos for front and back because you'll be running an app for the front end and an instance of the server on the back end. All right. Yes, you can use ESLint. You can use Prettier. It's always good to have some kind of structure in place to standardize the way you write your code. It's not uncommon for companies to have style guides as far as you format your code this way. This is the expectation. So that's totally fine to use ESLint and Prettier. And I think that hits the highlights of the questions that came in.
Yeah.
And awesome. Keep those questions coming. These are great. And it's good to talk about this now. Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Frank.
One quick thing, just so like those things that were asked about, like the repos, the things that we just went over with the Agile, Sprint, and Scrum, like these are all will be talked about in your first meeting. So all these things, again, there's a lot of new things you'll be learning. Some things you may kind of know of or heard of, but all these concepts will be talked about during that first meeting. So it's nothing like you have to like know right away or know before your meeting starts, unless you want to like do your own little research ahead of time.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So merge conflict, we've alluded to it a little bit here and there throughout our orientation so far. And it happens when multiple people are working on the same code base. It's normal to have merge conflicts. It's especially likely to happen if you're making large changes to code and not committing frequently. So committing frequently and doing small chunks of work and pushing those and making sure those work is going to help avoid having significant merge conflicts. If somebody completely writes, 500 lines of code on a file or a component or whatever and pushes that, and then somebody else is doing some other part that connects with that, that's when you're going to wind up running into those kinds of issues. And a merge conflict is when a file has two different pushes happening where there are line or lines of code that don't match. And so it doesn't know which one is the one to take. And that's why you wind up with a merge conflict and have to go through resolving it. Ways to be able to avoid this: pull locally after each pull request gets merged, so that way you have the most recent version of code on your machine. So, team member one just did something, even though team member two, have been working on a feature, but now my other file that I'm not even paying attention to or working on because it's not part of my feature has updates, and my version does not have those updates. That's why you'll do that pull, is to make sure that the other stuff that you're not even touching, that might be getting updated behind the scenes while you're focused on your project or your piece of the project, gets updated, so that way when you push yours, it's not trying to negate all of the work that they did because you didn't pull in the changes that they made. So pull locally after each pull request gets merged. Always do your work on a separate branch from main or development, so that way you don't break your main and have to go through a huge mess of restructuring it. Okay, all right, so what happens now? If you have not already, decide amongst your group what day and time you'll meet each week. React students, you all can also decide if you all are going to have just a little front-end meeting yourselves and when you want to have that. Same thing for Node students. You can decide if you want just a Node students meeting and when you'll be doing that. If you haven't yet, start brainstorming ideas for your project. If you already have brainstormed some ideas, either on your own or collectively, go ahead and start narrowing it down to an idea or two. Your mentors will be able to help you during meetings next week to make sure that you haven't made it bigger than an 8-week time can allow for. And then start looking at your Welcome to Practicum page and Sprint 1 pages in the Learns app. Okay, so what happens after Practicum? At the end of the first week, so at the end of week 8, is when you will have your presentation, your demonstration of your project. As a group, you need to present your work together, so everybody that was involved in writing any code should be a part of that presentation. You also need to complete a self-evaluation form by the end of that 8th week. That is going to serve as your apprenticeship application. So there's no other paperwork that you have to do other than take a few moments and think about, how did I do and what do I want to do next within the program. You'll also complete team evaluation forms. So for each of your team members, you'll be able to say, they did this really awesome, and I could tell they were struggling with this, so that's just an area that they probably ought to strengthen. So sharing your feedback is helpful, so that way we can then pass it along to each other. And yeah, the application process is going to include that coding assignment as well. The coding assignment, you'll have a 2-week time period to do it. You do need to sit down and take that assessment within a 4-hour block. So look at your calendar from September 21st to October 6th and decide when you're going to be taking that assessment. You don't have to let us know when you're going to be taking it, but just be aware, September 21st to October 6th will be that window of time in which you can take this 4-hour assessment. And then for the apprenticeship, it's a 1-year offer with a 9-month minimum commitment, no job searching during that first 9 months. It's a 40 hours a week job, paid position with benefits. It is remote. It has flexible hours as far as you do need to meet with your project team at different points during the typical 9-to-5 work week within US time zone hours. But beyond that, you have some flexibility as far as when you're working on things for the project that you're assigned to. It's only available for people with US work authorization, so be aware of that. And it can be renewed for a 2nd year in case you get to the end of it and you're like, I want to keep working. So that's just some general information about the apprenticeship. And that kind of concludes all of the questions and information that we were going to share about Practicum. So hit us up with things that you're pondering and wondering about.
Also, that one thing that is mentioned in this last slide, where it says you can complete team evaluation form. So as I mentioned earlier and I also mentioned as well here. So if your question is, well, how is it determined who gets accepted into the program, or what's the process, which I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. So you first decide if you want to apply for apprenticeship. If you do, you will take your coding assessment, and then once you finish, it's graded, which we get a score. So as far as we get all the applicants for apprenticeship, we base it upon your coding assessment scores, but also your evaluations from your mentor and your teammates. So that's why it's really important, as Mariella said, to act professionally with everybody, to like think about communication, to make sure everybody knows what you're working on, because that's also how you're evaluated by your mentor and your teammates. So again, like if you disappear for a couple of days or a week and don't tell anybody, oh, that probably someone will eventually say something. Hey, like that person was really cool, but they just disappeared for a week. I don't know what the hell happened to that person. Okay, we're going to know that because someone will say something, either your mentor or a teammate. So it's really important that, obviously we want you to have an enjoyable time. We don't want to be like, oh my God, it's so stressful, but, treat it like it's a kind of like a job, you know, you want to have fun, but also you want to work well with everybody. You want to communicate, just like a regular job, because that's part of the evaluation process. So we take the assessments, we take the evaluations, and then we determine who is going to be interviewed. So there's an interview that we do for each person, and then we take that list of applications, we narrow it down to a smaller list, and that smaller list is who we interview, and then from that smaller list, we take a subset of that list, and that's who we decide who's going to be an apprentice. So there's just like a regular job, but obviously it's on a smaller scale, and the percentages of hiring are going to be a bit higher than hundreds or thousands of applicants for like one position. But again, it's all the applicants filtered down to a smaller set. That smaller set is going to be interviewed, and from that interview smaller set, we take a smaller set of that to be apprentices for that hiring. We usually do hiring for apprentices usually after every practicum, most of the time. And also,
And
if you're
it,
asking, well, how many? Oh, sorry,
no, go
if
ahead,
you're
Frank.
asking, well, how many apprentices do you usually hire? It varies. Sometimes we hire just 2 or 3. Sometimes we hire double that. So it really depends. There is no like, well, we're definitely going to be hiring this amount. So if you ask that, we really can't give you an answer. But we usually hire, every practicum, a few apprentices, but it really depends on our needs. It depends on our existing apprentices when they leave. They can leave after 9 months. So it depends on a lot of factors.
And it's also not a one and done kind of a thing. If you apply and you aren't accepted this time around, it does not exclude you from ever applying for the apprenticeship ever
Mm.
again. There are options that you can do following practicum, including take another practicum just to be able to keep practicing and keeping your skills sharp while you're job searching. You can take another advanced class. You can volunteer with the intro class as an assignment reviewer or a mentor, so that way you can, again, keep those skills sharp and then also help out students that are kind of following in your footsteps. So there are plenty of options. We highlight all of that information with you, just as nobody doesn't get an answer from us when they apply to our program. Like, we always let you know, you're not quite ready yet, here are some options, or you are ready, welcome to the program. Same kind of thing for the apprenticeship. If you aren't accepted to the apprenticeship, we'll let you know what you can do moving forward to kind of keep that trajectory and the momentum going on your job search and on your career move into the industry.
Just as an example of that, we did hiring for the last practicum, a couple months ago, and there were at least 2 hires that applied twice. It was like the third time around they applied. So don't think, oh man, I didn't get in. Shit, I'm all, they're at the end of the world. It's not. You can continue to learn and progress, take another course, and you can apply again, in a couple months, and then give another chance for it. So it's never like the end of the story if you don't make it in this. Whenever you do apply, you can always, like Mary said, try again, try again. And we've had some great stories where they just didn't stop. They kept on applying, did another practicum or two, and they got in, and they're apprentices now. So don't ever think, okay, that's the end. You can keep on trying, keep on trying.
Exactly. Yeah. Any questions we haven't answered from students that we need to address before we move on to our mentor orientation for the evening? All right, cool. Well, if you do think of questions along the way, you know where to find Frank and I. We're always available on Slack. Well, not always, but you can reach us through Slack and we will get back to you as soon as we're able to get back to you, kind of a thing. So reach out if there's things that you need. Otherwise, scroll up in the chat. I did drop the link to your course calendar, so that way you can go ahead and start taking a look at some of the content at your convenience this week and weekend. And yeah, have a great practicum, learn lots, have fun, enjoy your experience. Be glad that it's not a high stakes experience for a real client who would be paying you money and would get grumpy if they didn't like what they saw. So have a good time, everybody. Thanks, students.